Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Point of View. I am going to be your host and anchor for the series. My name is Srishti Bajaj. I'm the curator and the moderator for Point of View. And I'm also a product designer and an educator by, well, training and experience. And until recently, I was head of department for Pearl Academy, but I'm also now serving as VP and head of academic outreach for ADI, Delhi chapter. And for all those who've joined us, thank you very, very much for taking the time. You'll be joining me for the next 30 days, 5 weeks, 15 episodes of exciting conversations with 15 prolific creatives from the domain of design education, communication design, textile design, architecture, and interior design. And we will try and take a look into their creative, wondrous design thinking minds and try and unlock and try to understand what makes them who they are. And I would like to thank all the speakers for coming on board for Point of View. This is going to be fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to each of the conversations. Now, most importantly, I would like all of you to applaud and celebrate, join me in celebrating 15 years of Cinder Bay's existence. It's been 15 years since Cinder Bay School of Design was established, and a big round of applause for the captain of the ship and our man on the mission, Professor Basan Nair, Director, Cinder Bay School of Design. He's there, he's watching. So please, in the chat box, feel free to give him a big round of applause and congratulations. Just a little background for, I know there are a lot of students, but for people who are new to Cinder Bay, just a little background. Cinder Bay was established in 2006 in Calicut, and under his leadership, it has become a well-recognized institute of design. It provides both PG and UG programs in interiors, fashion, visual communication, and is across 14 branches, by the way. No mean feat, Basant, so that's amazing. There are about 13,000 alumni who are already working in the industry, and currently the school is under the Bangalore University. It's a fantastic achievement, and really it's amazing for especially people like us in the north who don't know what's going on around in the south so much. This is an amazing feat. And I'd also like to very quickly thank Sophia, Viraj, and Swapna, who have been helping behind the scene with many, many things that it takes to put an event like this together. So while I and the speaker do our job, I would like the audiences to sit back comfortably, get your brew, hot or cold, and just enjoy this day-to-day. And by the way, before I bring on my first speaker, I want to ask you guys my one question. Swapna, would you please bring out the poll? Poll number 1, please. Okay, before we start, I would like you to answer this. Think, okay? What does creative success look like to all of you? Many of you are in your first formative years of design education. Many of you are professional and working. And like me, some of you also have been around for a while. So no matter where you are in that stage of your career, what do you see is the most important thing? The high paycheck, the recognition, or the creative fulfillment? What gets your goat? Please answer that question. I'm going to very quickly give you guys 30 seconds. I'm looking at my stopwatch. And then we will close the poll and try and find an answer to this. And there's a very good reason why I brought the poll in first before I'm introducing the new speaker, because well, actually, you just have to wait for it. Okay, so has it been 30 seconds yet, Swapna? Should we look at the answers, please? What does our poll say? Creative fulfillment. I love you guys already. That is the right answer. And recognition is also very, very important. Nobody said paycheck. What, you all guys are willing to work for free? Really? Okay. Anybody hiring free interns, please look at this lineup of audiences and participants. Maybe we can get them to be creatively fulfilled and not get paid. Anyways, jokes apart, I think creative fulfillment is extremely important. And in some sense, perhaps it involves both having a high paycheck and recognition. And so why do you think I brought this poll first, because our next speaker, Professor Anuradha Chatterjee, if I tell you and read out her very little biography, you will understand what creative success actually means. Hello, Professor, how are you? You can turn on your camera now.
Hi, Srishti. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all well. Hi.
Yes. So, Anu, I want to see how you react to this entire lineup that I'm going to read about you. Guys, she is amazing. You should, I'm just going to read it. Okay. So, Anuradha, Dr. Anuradha Chatterjee is an Indian-born Australian feminist academic practitioner in the architecture and design based in Australia and India. You have a diploma in architecture from TVB, School of Habitat Studies, a master's in architecture in history and theory of architecture from, and PhD in built environment from the University of New South Wales. You are a professor and a dean at Faculty of Design, Manipal University in Jaipur, which is where you're currently working. And before that, you were the Dean of Academics at Avani Institute of Design. And you've published 3 books already. And that's not enough, guys. Wait, hold on. There's more. You're also the regional editor of Asia Pacific, of Textile, Clothes and Culture, companion to the Guild of St. George, a member of the editorial board of architecture, Cambridge Scholar Publishing, Senior Research Fellow, Honorary Center for Architecture Theory Criticism, History at the University of Queensland, and member of the Board of Review for CEPT University's Masters of Architecture and MA in Architectural History and Theory program since 2019. You've taught, of course, at many different places. You've taught in Australia at UNSW. You have taught in Sydney, University of Technology, University of South Australia, University of Tasmania, in China at Xi'an Jiatong Liverpool University, and of course in India and Avni and Sushant and Pearl, where I actually met you, and of course in Srishti Manipal University. I think I mentioned that already. And your research interests includes theory and history, feminist discourses, textile tectonic theories of architecture, potentialities of theories, generative processes in design, gender and academic leadership, and student learning culture and critical studio pedagogies. You're also a registered architect with the Council of Architecture India, International Associate Member of America Institute of Architects, affiliate the Council of Architecture India, International Associate Member, American Institute of Architects, affiliate level 1 member, Australian Institute of Architects, and affiliate member, Royal Institute of British Architects. How did you manage all of that? This is not a short bio at all, and amazing accomplishments. So you are phenomenal, Professor. Oh, there we go. We have some applauses from the audiences as well.
Oh my God, I'm blushing. I'm blushing, Srishti. Thank you so much. Well, I think, Srishti, it's not an achievement. I mean, I'm really grateful that you call it an achievement, but to me, it's my life, and it's I suppose what we call restlessness, always wanting to do more, always wanting to be busy and engaged, occupied, inspired. So it looks like an achievement when you put it on in a CV. So I always tell people, when you don't do CV building activities, just lead a life that you want to lead, and the CV will build itself. So, but yeah, thank you so much for that, Srishti.
That's an amazing start to this conversation. I think this is something that we are going to come back to, the idea of building a career, crafting a career that you would enjoy, and what that means to each one of us. So I think the interesting part of putting this point of view together is that I really wanted to look at how each of the speakers and their journeys began, because oftentimes we get to hear about the work you're doing. We get to hear about all the amazing, exhibitions or papers one writes, but one doesn't know where the journey actually began and what shaped you to who you are today. And I think for that very reason, I would like to start early. I remember we were talking, and I was trying to prod you to figure out where did this sort of inclination towards history and architecture came from, and you had an interesting anecdote to offer.
Yeah.
And can you share that with our audiences, please?
Yeah, I think I remember asking me, Srishti, that why did you go for history and theory? And I said, well, that's one thing I didn't feel I learned when I was doing my bachelor's degree. Also, there was this idea that theory was something quite inaccessible, that you had to be really smart and like really intellectual and cool. Yeah, it just wasn't the right foundation. And I thought that's something I haven't learned. So given that I'm going to do my master's, I should do it in something that I haven't really learned. So it's kind of closing the gap. That was really important to me always. So, doing degrees that don't repeat and don't just kind of repeat and reiterate what you've already done, but they kind of add new streams, new tracks to your career. So yeah.
But did you always want to do architecture, or like a lot of engineers end up in design, and a lot of
valid question. Yeah, that's really relevant question. I mean, even today, I think a lot of students in schools are not aware of architecture. I was not really aware of architecture. I was a medicine student, and I believe I was going to spend my life doing zoology, and I was in Hansraj for a while, and I said, well, because I was a medicine student, so it was kind of preordained that you have to do these entrance exams and get in. If you don't get in, you kind of do BSc somewhere, and then you try again. And then it happened that it just, and again, I call it I'm an accidental architect, because I was always sure that I wanted to do a professional degree. I wanted to be a professional rather than just sort of somebody in pure science. Probably I would start my own thing. So when this college opened up in the neighborhood, TVB School of Habitat Studies, I thought, this is great. I've got to do this. But I knew nothing about architecture when I started. I thought, oh, it's making building sketching. It's pretty much what most students know. I didn't have a portfolio. I drew. I mean, I would draw constantly, but I didn't really have a portfolio of works that I could take to my interview. So I was like an accidental architect, but it kind of worked out. I mean, it can work. It doesn't always work out. But I think the key was in being open-minded. That yes, I don't know about this degree, but it seems challenging, and I'm open to learning. First year is always really hard for in any degree, obviously, because the school system doesn't really prepare you for the university degree. It does not. You pick a degree, whether it's bachelor's in commerce or science or whatever. The school doesn't prepare you for that. So so that was my journey. That's why I sort of it happened by accident, and I'm really happy that I got into it.
Well, we are also very happy that we have you here through accident or not. And I think a lot of students will resonate with what you're saying, because a lot of the first year students, at least, would feel exactly what you're saying about the 10+2 not really preparing us for what the university demands from us. And it is always quite a journey. So your first few years in TVB, TVB obviously is now called a different university, but in those days it was quite an avant-garde sort of institute. And before you talk about that, I want to share a couple of screen images that you've shared with me. Guys, so this is work from TVB, and this is Anuradha. Please tell us about your early days.
They're very early days. Usually, this was probably done in '97. That's a long time ago, and obviously everything was analog, copy paste, all of that. So it was this. What you see on screen is a study of settlement planning and settlement design. And because my thesis was to do with the planning of a resettlement colony using kind of gender and feminist perspectives, that the planning had to kind of respond to that. But that needed extensive amount of field work and field study. And this is, like I said, early 1997, kind of composing that on an A2 sheet and kind of looking at doing that field study. So yeah, it really takes me back looking at these images and drawings.
It's interesting that the project that you're showing here is about gender and feminist perspectives, because this is also very much concurrent to your persuasion now, because you are a champion of women in architecture, as far as I understand. So I'm wondering if it started here, right here in TVB.
Yes, it absolutely did. And I think that strength has always existed through my work. If not explicitly, it's kind of always there. It's not always about talking about women architects, but about women in the built environment, or feminist ways of looking at knowledge, and feminist ways of constructing knowledge, and feminist ways of teaching as well. So even the pedagogy, the way we teach, is is informed by these ideas and values, I think. And you're absolutely right. It did start at that point.
Being at TVB, what was that experience like? Because I'm sure a lot of students sitting here are wondering what did college look like in 1997? How did you learn? Who were your professors? What were your influences, so to speak?
My God, yeah, that's a tough question. A lot of it was a blur because you go to parties and things. No. We did submit. We did make our submissions on time, and all of that was important. I think architecture, at least as a degree, or design, I think as a degree, is a very social. It's a very social act. It's not something that is desk driven. You don't learn by sitting at your desk and reading books, but you learn by interacting, by pitching ideas against each other, by arguing with your peers, by arguing with your professors, by having, kind of showdowns in juries. And it's a very public and a very passionate act. And you have to be very passionate. Otherwise, it just feels like you have to really be invested. So I think I think a lot of design colleges and design institutions are still that, and that's the one thing I always tell students, that so much of that is social, it's a collective, it is not something that you learn. You cannot learn design in isolation. So there was a lot of emphasis on hanging out with your peers and doing things together, and our particular college was really focused on giving us a backbone, saying that if you don't believe in something, don't stand up for it. Or if you believe in something, speak up for it. So we were definitely sort of trained, or sort of encouraged to be critical thinkers, speakers, doers, and we would be questioned if we took the conservative path, the conservative model. Definitely there'd be a kind of a subtle questioning of that, not kind of an overt questionings. But so I think it was an interesting foundation for us, I think, for a lot of us. So yeah.
I have a couple more images of your time at TVB that you've shared. Do you want to quickly take us through what we're looking at?
Yeah, that's my God. That's a bigger ground drawing of a settlement plan. If you have any architects in the audience, my God, then that's all hand drawn. That's pre-CAD.
Wow.
That's at the cusp of CAD actually, but because that has contour lines that will hand drawn, and that would kind of shift because the humidity levels in Delhi kept on changing. I think a lot of us know what happens to drawings and models due to the heat. So all of that was painstakingly kind of, like I said, we were at the cusp generation of CAD. So that's a figure ground of the resettlement plan that I designed for Meroli, for a group of mine workers to resettle them.
That's beautiful. I mean, I think it's almost like cartography in some sense. So I mean, I love maps. So this is beautiful, and I think a lot of students who use CAD will perhaps not be able to measure the amount of effort it actually takes to do it by hand. It's a curious thing. One should try it at least. I'm talking to the new students, yeah.
Yeah, it's easier doing it by hand. I think it's because the fiddly bits. Because I think with CAD you can't quite get that subtle shift that you think just when shifting the tracing paper. So I think hand drawing and CAD, I think definitely has its value. The replicability is there. But I think when you're thinking by shifting, transparent sheets on top of opaque sheets, I think that thinking is not. I don't think you can kind of replicate that. But I mean, every tool has its own place in the design process.
I did sneak in one more image of you.
Yeah.
This is
Archival images, yeah.
archival images, but you're getting awarded, or this is the graduating ceremony?
That's a graduating ceremony. So so we've got Achyut Kanbinde on right, who's giving me my diploma, my 5-year diploma. On left we have Satish Gujral, who's giving me the gold medal, the certificate for the gold medal for thesis, which I didn't, by the way, know, because I took forever to finish. I thought they would just be happy to get rid of me. Then maybe that's why they gave me a gold medal.
Well done. Get out.
Good riddance.
Good riddance. So between this and your master's, were you working, or did you always know that you wanted to straight away proceed to doing a master's?
Yeah, so I did have brief stints of work and training, but I mean, I have kind of really pursued academia as a kind of a practice, not because I was afraid of practice, but because I found it really engaging. There was just so much to get into and learn and publish and research, and teaching itself is a form of practice as well. Yeah.
So accidentally or not, but we've jumped to the next one. This is UNSW. Tell us about this image.
So I mean, I think on the right-hand side is my studio where we used to teach the final year students. Some of my colleagues are there, and students are hiding behind those panels, as you can see. The image in the middle is a summer studio that we did at sort of master's first year level. So there was a 4-week of intensive studio. And there's of course the picture is it's Pritzker Prize winner Glenn Murcutt. It was really such an honor to have worked with a Pritzker Prize winner and to learn the discipline of work, to learn how to, how do you see a site, how do you analyze a site. So I mean, even as a faculty member, and we always it's such an honor to work with people like that because you can learn so much. Yeah.
What was the big shift that you thought you felt between having done an undergrad here and then moving for a master's in Australia and looking at history? But is there a different perspective on architecture that you found, or it's the same, it's just the approaches are different? How would you rationalize?
Well, I think there's two things. One is I went in 99 again. It was sort of, again, it was not so digitized. Resources and so to me to go to a real university library was a high point. It was like, wow, I can pick out all these iconic books as I walk down the aisle. So that was the first thing. And the second was that it was not very delivery intensive. Delivery was there, but there was a lot of focus on term papers and research papers, and so there was a lot of the onus of learning was also on the student, and so if you liked getting into that would be a great place for you. And it just seemed kind of open. It wasn't restrained. It wasn't that you had to research a paper using these references, that you had to come up with this kind of an outcome. It was a lot more open-ended, but definitely, and of course, campus environments, which now we have a lot of great universities with great campuses. But again, it's a whole experience. It's not just study, but it's a whole university experience. It's kind of an integrated experience, which I really loved.
And we have a few more images of you as a student, as a master's student, I presume.
No, that's a faculty. So
that's a faculty. Okay.
On the left are students, final year students. In the middle are students, again, final year students from University of Adelaide. That was my farewell drinks. And one of my colleagues on the right, we worked really closely together. And, so again, learning collaboration. I think that some of these skills are really important. How do you work with people? How do you really collaborate? And it has to be very organic and very mutual and respectful and all of that. So some of these images kind of testify to that. Yeah.
This is a young one, PhD champion, or is this a faculty champion?
No, these are students. This was when we were in, I think, second year or third year of PhD. So yeah, we were young. I was young once. Yeah, that was a long time ago. It says 2005 or 6 in the images, so that tells you how old I am. But yeah, we were really young, and they selected us out of the blue. Said, let's go for a photo shoot, and we will put you in the university magazine. And I still have that magazine, and I can still look back and it's kind of nice to go back. Gosh, what is it? Is it 2006? Yeah, so
Yep,
about
May
15 years ago. Do my dreams. There's a little passage in there. There's a little blurb in there from all of us saying, what do you want to be and where will you end up? So I actually need to go and check that out tonight to see, how have my aims changed? Because, when you write in this magazine, you'll just say something, blah, and then let's go back 15 years later and see. It's still there. It's a record, published proof that you said something 15 years ago.
It might be interesting to look at whether it turned prophetic or not, and whether what you said actually came true. But this is really interesting. I think it's for a lot of students who are watching in. I think it's important to note that even as throughout your journey, whether it's an undergrad or a master's, these experiences that you gather, these kind of interactions that you have, and when you put yourself out there, I think a lot of students feel a certain lack of confidence often, that, oh, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, and am I good enough? What would you say to students like that?
Anxiety, Srishti. I mean, when I went to Sydney in '99, that was my first international trip. I didn't even know how to put the phone card into the little slot in the thing. And there was the days of the phone card. Absolutely panicked. So go with it. Be easy with the discomfort. Be easy with feeling like an idiot. Like you'll feel like a fool most of the time. And be okay with that. And slowly you kind of emerge and evolve into it. But I think you're absolutely right. I think experiences, networks, and the diversity, the richness of experience really matters. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be overseas, but it can be any kind of, as long as it's different to what you're used to, I think.
And sort of that brings us to your PhD, which is you continued your education at UNSW. And this is, I think, your PhD kind of really did shape your academic work and life after the stage, because the John Ruskin, and for a lot of the students who perhaps are not familiar, you can get these books. And John Ruskin and the Fabric of Architecture is written by Professor Anuradha Chatterjee. It's actually, Anuradha, why don't you talk about it? I think you probably do a better job of it.
So this the book was published in 2018, and I started my PhD in 2003. So again, it's like a long journey, and it takes a while for something to start and then culminate into a book, which people want to buy and pay good money for. I think again, that's archival images. I think it was important to look at this. 2003, we still had, I think, I don't know if you remember, we still had inkjet and bubble jet printers. So this, and libraries, and growing up in Delhi, and National Museum was one library, and there weren't a lot of libraries where you could find books from the 19th century. So I got this off the internet and printed it and bound it, and as you can see, it's quite vintage. But again, it's such an important document to me that till today I keep it. I'll never let go of it, because this is what really started my journey. And then as I've moved into my PhD, and again, this is an alien concept for a lot of students. CD-ROMs is such an outdated concept now. People are like, what, CD-1? So this is an entire volume, 39 volumes, written by John Ruskin, who was a 19th century British social critic, art critic, architectural historian, theorist. So it's kind of a polymath. And he wrote a lot about nature, wrote a lot about craft and craftsmanship, about humanity, what it means to have humane work environments and humane work. He wrote a lot about art. He wrote a lot about clothing, about dressing. So, and they're all kind of interconnected. All of these ideas are not disparate ideas, but they're interconnected. So on the left-hand side, you have this box, which I think I paid about $200 for that. That's 39 volumes of, I'm not sure, maybe that's the wrong amount, but I'm not sure now. That's about 39, that's all 39 volumes of his work. So there are 39 volumes of his works that I could scan, but the digitization of the books made it a different kind of a reading. So my supervisor would say, "Oh, you guys are lazy, kind of reading things off a CD-ROM, and you're not going to the library and turning pages like we used to do." This kind of intergenerational angst that we have even with our students now. abhi hamare zamane mein to you don't know how hard we worked, So it was the same kind
How
of
much we have to
conversation.
read. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that changes the nature of the reading. Even the technology that we use changes the nature. So the kind of readings that became possible because it was a searchable CD-ROM.
Okay.
And searchable, so the kind I could do an intertextual, I could redo a reading across the books rather than reading it page by page, book by book. And I was able to kind of connect many different things that happened across the history of these different 39 different volumes.
Why John Ruskin for your PhD thesis? I mean, where did that come about? Because I think it's a very interesting character out of history to pick out, especially in reference to architecture. So how did that come about for you?
Yeah, see, Ruskin is very important even now, I think, for a lot of conservation architects, but that's not the reason I picked out Ruskin. I was interested in this idea of text and especially architectural literature, especially manuals and treatises and theories, and reading them in with a kind of a feminist lens. So one of the restrictions was that I had to read something in English because otherwise to read text from Italy, I needed to know the language. So I thought, I'm interested in this. And also I was aware of Ruskin's, we read Seven Lamps in first year, in our bachelor's, and it made absolutely no sense because it has to be structured. The reading in 19th century texts, it's not really accessible. But I knew that there was a lot of conversation around craftsmanship and how you make things. And I thought, this would be quite interesting to, I mean, again, you can't say that, well, this is the right choice or the wrong choice. Again, when we say research, so choosing a research topic, it's as good a topic as any. I could have easily have read somebody else, but then again, one wonders whether you discover the topic or the topic discovers you, or it's kind of a mutual, finding of each other. So, yeah.
And you talk about, we'll come back to this book cover in a second, but you talked about craftsmanship and how did that influence your study, or at least when you look at it from a lens of a conservationalist or a historian, and you compared it with contemporary architecture, how did you find, or what makes it relevant for you for it to be relevant today?
Yeah, right. That's a hard question. Let me just try to answer that. So this book was, to me, it was interesting because I came across it and I said, well, there's something amiss about Ruskin's writings. It is not what they are. So there's what we call critical thinking, Srishti, is that, we say, yes, critical thinking, but how do you sit down and think critically? When you read something, and especially a critique of it, then you think there is more to what is being said, right? There's something that I don't see yet. And that is critical thinking, is that, if I read this, I could bring to light something that nobody has seen before. So that is also critical thinking, being aware of what is not being said and what is hidden, kind of a subtext to that. So when I read David Pye, and he really questions this idea of craftsmanship. So Ruskin says that for something to be called craft or a good craft, it would have to be imperfect. So he had some ideas of irregularity and asymmetry, and David Pye is kind of talked about that that's not really possible. That as craftspersons, the intention is to work with precision. You don't set out to produce errors and mistakes, right? But what Ruskin was talking about was this idea of humanity. When I talked about Srishti, when I said why did I pick up Ruskin, because he's relevant to everybody, because it's talk about work satisfaction, what we call in kind of popular culture, we said. Work satisfaction. Are you satisfied with your work? The idea of humanizing labor, humanizing work, is something that was central to this idea of craft. So his argument was that if you are satisfied with your work, you will if you set out to make very precise things, you will be dissatisfied because you are a machine. If you're a human being, you will make mistakes, and therefore your work will be uneven, or it will have errors. And he was always on a quest for, in architecture and nature, to show that imperfection is part of life. Life is imperfect, and I think that's something quite fundamentally beautiful about that premise. Now that whatever is living is not perfect because it constantly grows and changes. So it's always uneven. So when he looks at a building, and all the different parts are not even, He says, well, that it's because it seems to be alive, a building that is perfect, equal, everything, all the parts measure the same, is machined in a way. So it was also a critique of that 19th century, that industrial revolution. So it was very interesting like that. But just the way he argues it is, so I thought, but because there is a gap, and I think because there is a gap, it is a point to enter that text and see. So if it is not about this, what is that text about? And that's when I started to discover all these connections between fabrics and textile and architecture, which I think you and I have talked about a little bit in the past, I think.
And I think that's a great segue into the next, because it's not often that you find architects embracing fashion and textiles in their work as vividly as perhaps you have drawn in terms of parallels. And again, this is about surfaces, and we were discussing surfaces in the sense that I agreed with your statement that surfaces are performance, because when you look at an architectural building, at least the emotion that it evokes in you, in some sense, it is dramatic. You know, a building can be dramatic, it can be romantic, it can be powerful. So I do understand where you're coming from when you say surface is performance, and I think it leads back to John Ruskin's work. But how do you draw that parallel between architecture and clothing? That for me it's a very curious juxtaposition.
So I think these images at least show you. So these are some of Ruskin's favorite buildings. In the right, you have the Church of San Michele in Lucca in Italy. Then on the middle, you have Ducal Palace in Venice. On the left, you have the Basilica of St. Mark's in Venice again. So these were some of Ruskin's favorite buildings. And so when you read into it, the main thing is that they have the surfaces are analogous to textiles. So the right-hand side, because of the inlaid work, it's a green and white inlaid work. It kind of responds to this idea of the brocade. And whereas in the one in the middle, it has a very clear resemblance to a kind of a stretched fabric surface that is tied up. So as those column, that little detail in the corner is almost like a piping that holds something in place. Like, so it's got this tensed, stretched fabric-like, and at the same time it has a weave. The checkered marble blocks also kind of resemble a weave. And the rest of the image and the rest of those traceries at the bottom, they are like lace that is interconnected. So he talks about, and I'm not making these things up, he's actually in his writings, he talks about how he compares the work of the architect to that of a tailor. He says, like the tailor takes the cloth, architect takes the wall and builds. He says that that's the material that for the architect, it's the material, it's a bricks, but he compares that to the work of the tailor. And on the left, again, he's showing this ideas of color. That color is quite important. It shows that it's a living building. It shows, because we're all, as you can see, we have our bodies have color, because they show that we're alive. People who are alive have skin tone, and that whole idea is also then picked up in the coloring of the dress as well. So and of course, for him, there was also in all of these, there's a little bit of that imperfection that we talk about. We said that it's not quite straight. It's not quite. And this image, I think the next image shows that a lot clearer. I think just go back one. Image. So this is showing much more closely this idea of this idea of the blush, of the skin color, and how that's captured in the dress, and how those ideas are then captured in the building itself. So the architecture is a form of tailoring, and architecture is surface. So he distinguishes building and architecture. A building is a building. Building is a fort, it's a ship, it's a rampart, it's a wall. A building is quite a utilitarian thing. And when you dress it up, that is architecture. Architecture is a dressing up of buildings. So it's almost like the female body, it's a human body. And for us to be functional in any culture, we have to be dressed and clothed. So he had the same kind of an analogy that he had towards human life.
And we have a few more examples of some select images of understanding the context here. Would you like to sort of
I think if we could go back one image, I think we may have missed out.
This one?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I think so. So again, my work is not obviously in vacuum. And there's already, when I was doing my research, there's already discourse on architecture and fashion, because a lot of modern architects are talking about fashion. They're also designing clothes. So a lot of them are designing, writing about fashion, especially men's fashion, women's fashion, and especially what it means to be modern. What it means to be modern. And there's a lot of architects, so Le Corbusier, Adolf Loos, that wrote about clothing and how you should be dressed in order to be modern. So it was not just about modern buildings and modern products, but also about how you should dress. So we're just looking at some of these publications that are, so there's already an existing discourse globally on, and especially looking at early 20th century onwards. Nobody has really looked at sort of this phase here, sort of late 19th century, where Ruskin is kind of emerging into this kind of modern period. So that's just to kind of highlight that there's a broader discourse within which one's research is always positioned. And that's what makes it kind of contemporary and relevant. And I think the next slide was probably going to talk about a much more visually direct way about analogies between that Selfridges and Birmingham on the right, and that's I think it's a Prada dress. I'm not sure what collection, what year, but again, this idea that contemporary architecture. So there's a return as well. So that the architects now kind of, at least from 2000 onwards, there's a kind of a shift and an interest again in surface, also because of digital technologies and softwares to kind of think of, how you might design and engineer that. So, and again, on the right, you're again looking at more architectural clothing. It's possible to think of not just analogies between architecture and clothing, but also architectural or tectonic clothing on the right.
And there's one more here. This is your publication where you're an editor, coming back to surfaces. What I would like to ask you here is that it's an interesting intersection between architecture and fashion, and it leads me to think in terms of the students that are watching this today, how they could possibly be more transdisciplinary in some sense. You don't have to just be an interior designer. You could borrow from a lot of other crafts and disciplines, whether it's fashion or biology today, and vice versa. And what would you recommend students, or maybe not recommend, but what are your thoughts on blending of these disciplines and what one should be careful about, because it can go very superficial very easily. So where do you draw the line, that how much do you borrow and how much you keep?
Well, I mean, I think there's a core discipline, isn't it? So if you're a product designer, that's you have a core discipline, and you can borrow from interface design, textile design, fashion design, interior. You can borrow from these ideas. You can borrow from philosophy. You can borrow from gender studies. But I think the core remains the same. That's what I did with my PhD. I read on everything, on history of science, theory of science. I read theoretical texts on virtually all aspects. But the core still remains history and theory. So I think design is always interdisciplinary. I think we just end up putting them in silos because it's easy to manage, measure, quantify. But I do feel that design education has to be a lot more. We have to open it up, especially the way we're teaching it now. Especially encourage students to read works of fiction and non-critical non-fiction works, on design. I mean, from read on science fiction. I mean, you could kind of read on. So I think broadening your thinking beyond the curriculum. I think curriculum can't do everything. Curriculum is a bare minimum, really. It's just a framework to achieve, the bare minimum. Sure. But I mean, if students are just studying that, then it will be minimum, right? So I think they maybe they should be reading clubs. I'm not sure exactly what will help, but or what might interest them. So it might be. I would say that take something that you find appealing, whether it's a novel, but if you like fiction, read fiction. If you like philosophy, read philosophy. If you like reading works of science fiction, read science fiction. But I think that, I mean, there has to be some kind of an interest generation. So, like Sashi, with my bachelor's, with gender, at least that became something that I'm always interested in. It's not something I did it for a project, It's something that I remain interested in, that keeps driving me. So I think those things are important. Broadening what you expose yourself to, and hanging on to the core discipline. That core is always there, but it just gets contaminated by these. It's not a pure thing anymore. It gets contaminated by these different things and becomes something else.
I was also curious about something else. I mean, your PhD with John Ruskin and the book thereafter is a fairly well-respected publication and well-received. And what I would like to understand is that, because that's been such a huge part of your life, do you still find those threads permeating other aspects of work that you do, or are you able to compartmentalize and look at different things from fresh perspectives, or do you feel it kind of permeates nonetheless?
I think the thing that permeates is how to read things how to read texts, how to read phenomenon in using feminist lenses. I think that always, because that was my interest. How do you read the female body in the text? It's hidden, it's unstated, it is there, it's relied upon, but it's invisible. So I think that thread always remains, this idea of the unconscious, that's something that is there, hidden, unstated, what wants to be said, it wants to be said, but it's not being said, right? So that approach, it's a mindset, Srishti. I think that, so it's not so much the subject matter, but it's a mindset. But having said that, I remain interested in textiles, because I think it's, I'm interested in that, because textiles are so much part of what we do. When we are born, we are swaddled, that, you kind of wrap, the baby, and, even when you're dying. And, so textile is a very, very important part, fabrics and textiles and surfaces. It's an important part of our life, not just architecture. So, so in that sense, it does remain central. So, for instance, I'm editing a special issue called Life After Life, especially looking at the effect any kind of crisis, whether it's a flood, earthquakes, pandemic, has on textile crafts and communities.
Interesting.
So I remain interested in these sorts of things, because I think they're important and they need to be valued. So again, there's always some thread. There's a kind of an interweaving. It's not the same thread that continues, but it's kind of maybe, that thread might connect to other threads, which might pick up other threads. And so it's kind of, if one has to imagine it, it's not quite linear. It is, but at the same time, we're moving forward, but at the same time, there's a kind of a convolution and complication of that same thread with other things, I think.
That's, I think, I'm already imagining the thread being woven by the way. So I'm imagining it visually, the way you were talking about it. So I think this also brings me to my next question, which is about, for you to be able to reflect on something with that kind of a critical or a feminist lens, it needs, that mindset also needs a certain mindset. It needs a certain training of the brain in some sense, or how you study, how do you look at the world, the criticality of it all. How do you build narrative, for example? How do you, come up with an idea and with cohesion in some sense? Through your work as a writer, through your work, through your publications, I know you write quite a bit. How do you get to that point where you're able to articulate cohesively these very different strands? Is there a skill set that one needs to learn? Is there training, or is it you have to be naturally gifted? If there's a student sitting in the audience wondering, my God, how do I get there? What would you recommend for them?
No, I don't think I have a gift. I don't think you need to be naturally gifted. I don't believe in gift at all, actually. I think it is a process. I think being still and connecting. I think we talked about this idea of reflection, right? We talk about it all the time. But do we really reflect? Do we really know how to reflect? Is that a skill? I'm not sure. Can that be taught? I don't think so. I think it can be learned, but it can be taught. So reflection, definitely, I think what you're saying is that what skill set does a student need? I think to be able to be unto yourself, go inside, go inwards, and reflect on what you're doing and why have you done what you. I always tell students, make informed decisions. Design is about know why you have done what. You must. That's an important part. It's not. That's when we talk about reflective practitioners. This idea of reflective and practice, reflection and practice, they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
You knew something because of which you made certain decisions, and those decisions are correct, and therefore you made other decisions based on those decisions. So it is logical, it is inductive. At the same point, there is also the space of intuition. And something tells you that no, I think there's something there. And it may not be scientifically, it may not be empirical, it may not be scientifically possible to point out why you should study that or explore that, but it's just something that stays and nags you, that nagging feeling. We call it hunch, we call it intuition. I think that's an important part of being a designer, and I think being any kind of a creative, really. But I don't think it's a gift at all. I think it's something that is honed over time, through willingness to go, reflect. One has to be willing to reflect. You can't just sit and reflect and write about it. So I think it's a mindset. I always say that it's a mindset rather than a gift or a skill set.
And I kind of feel also that one of the ways to reflect is to do more, because the more you mentioned, the more you expose yourself, the better you're able to look at what's working, what's not working. So even for you, I mean, you do a lot, whether it's publication, you've curated exhibitions, and I have a few slides to take us through that. Tell us about this aspect of work. I mean, is curation, I know curation and writing often go hand in hand, but how did this come about for you?
Well, I'll tell you that when we're between jobs, before you get your secure job or jobs, you do a lot of unpaid, low-paid work, and for me, those were the moments of learning. So the slide before this one, which we were looking at, was actually the one before this was blogs. It's World Architecture News as a website, and they asked me, do you want to be the correspondent for Sydney? I said yes. That means. And they paid me what, 50 pounds for each piece, which took me a long time to write. And I said, oh, that means I can go to exhibitions, I can go to studios, I can go for festivals, and I can write about them. And then it just puts you in a position where you have to do something, and there's a reason to do it. You can't just randomly sit down and write about exhibitions. You need a reason. So I did this for about 6 months, and I was in between jobs, and it made me go out there, connect with people, look at things, do things, hear things. And interestingly enough, I actually converted a lot of these essays, expanded a lot of these essays, and converted them into a book. Because somebody said, why don't you, you've done about 15 or 20 of these. Yeah. Why don't you expand them and make a book?
Sense,
and that was my second book. And so I thought, yes, that's it. Like you said, exposure, diversity of experiences. I've always said, I say yes to a lot of things. So like when you said, oh, come on, POV, I said yes. So that's unfortunately.
Thank you for that.
Unfortunately or fortunately, my default mode, and probably I suffer for it a lot of times. I say, oh, why don't you say yes to that? But rather than always weighing what's in it for me, do it. I've had a lot of people are always saying, I'll think about it, and I will, by then that thing would have moved on. Things move quite rapidly, and you've got to grab. So, and exhibitions for something. So when I was in Customs House, I think the next next couple of slides will talk to that. I think curating, writing the content, producing essays, curatorial essays. They need people to have skills. This is a refereed. This is like instead of a conference, we did an exhibition of designers, of design and art, and there were contributions from all over the world. And this was in China. We actually converted the basement car park into a pop-up gallery, and we did that hands-on. And we installed. The team of 3 of us. We actually installed all of that manually, just the 3 of us, and we were absolutely knackered by the end of it. And it was a great experience. This was refereed exhibition, and we just wanted to see, instead of doing a conference, if designers actually send in artifacts.
Nice.
What does it mean? And it was a great event, really. And well, I don't do a lot of this now, but I think it's a really really exciting space, and the space is really interesting as well. So yeah, no, that's okay.
No, I think I wasn't trying to prompt you.
No.
I was thinking there might be another slide showing exhibition work, and I realized that we have books next. So this is for all the people sitting in the audience. If you would like to get or read Anuradha, Professor Anuradha's writings, please go out and get these books. These are phenomenal.
Or ask your university to order them in the library.
Yes. Even
yes,
better.
That's the right thing to do. Yeah.
That's the right thing to do. So Basant, if you're listening,
and anybody else really, I think it's always a good idea to get the librarians to order it.
And then invite Anuradha to talk about them. There you go. There's another 4 talks for you at Cinder Bay happening soon. Okay, so moving to something very, very interesting. We talked about publications. We've talked about a lot of your kind of historical work, but teaching. I think when you speak, you do speak like an educator, and I love that actually. But studio work, how do you now work with students? This is work that you've done with your students. I'm not sure which university this is from.
This is Xianjiaotong, Liverpool, China.
So what is the studio about?
So this is about, it is basically a wetlands in Suzhou that was being kind of converted into this kind of, conservation park. But so we took a site in that, and we wanted students to kind of position. So this was an interpretation. This is a wetlands interpretation research center. That project is that. But the focus was on how do you build less, how do you build small, and how do you build sensitively with respect to the wetlands. Wetlands are incredibly important. And Asia has one of the largest share of wetlands in the world, and some of them are disappearing. So, so a lot of this was students kind of becoming sensitive to how do you position yourself to nature ecologies that are quite fragile, that are disappearing. But there's a lot of, as you can see, the images kind of focus on models and prototypes. I think, Srishti, you wanted to talk to me about this. I think you're saying that how do you teach students now? Now that we're at the desktop format, we're sitting at the dining tables and tiny study tables.
That's true. I think there's also a recurring theme that I see in whether it's your own projects in TVB or the kind of studios you're now running with the students. It does go back to the feminist lens again and again, and also the idea of ecology, whether it's the miners in TVB Mehrali site or it is the kind of perhaps the sites you're automatically picking up to give as studio projects to the students. Do you find that there is a certain investigation that you're still doing, maybe even through students' work that continues to interest you?
I think so, actually. I think, and you said investigation through students' work. I think that's a very important phrase because we always think that we are teaching them, we're delivering, and they're doing tasks for us. And for me, it's a research project. It's about finding out something. So when we say why should faculty members do research? Because you treat your studio as an inquiry. And so you're not just going and teaching students how to do something that they will learn, trust me. That's a very small part of teaching. But there's the rest of it, which is finding out something about a situation. I think you're saying whether I'm attracted to projects that have an ecological focus. I would say yes, but again, like I think I must have mentioned, out of all the projects that you ever do, there's a few that really stand out as some of your favorite, or some of the ones that you could really feel invested in, and that you gave those projects something, and they gave something back to you. And the entire collaboration works. And the whole project works as well, and it's a kind of it's everything together, I think.
I think this also I want to bring in tandem with the next project that we're going to show the audiences, but this idea of a phrase that you use, which is meandering. through work and meandering through life, and the kind of questions that you pose for your students for any kind of project work, which I find very, very interesting. And the next project, which is on the banks of Mayazi, which is another very, very interesting. How do you enunciate? Oh, wait, I'm going to jump here. Sorry. Yeah.
No problem. Yes, Srishti.
So I would like you to sort of deconstruct this in very, very interesting studio for our students here, because now you're not just bringing in architecture, but you're bringing in literature as part of the process. So can we know a little bit more about this process, please?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Rishti. I think this is another interesting and a very close to my heart project that we did with the third year students. And so Mahe, which is, as you know, is a French ex-French colony in a town in the Union Territory of Pondicherry, but actually adjacent to Kerala. We took the site there because the site again this idea of not being once. We take a situation that is complicated. It is next to Kerala, but it's not Kerala. The people speak Malayalam, but they're not Malayalis. And there's a kind of a complication in terms of it's a British colony. It's also a French colony, and the people there. A lot of people are there. Have remained citizens of France. Others have not chosen to. So there's a kind of a complex history. So we wanted to take a context that is not straightforward and like every day. We wanted to take something that is difficult to access, and at least for me it was difficult to access. So we said, and now Mahe is known as, it's kind of infamous really in a bad way for a place where you get cheap alcohol. It's terrible. And so we said it's an important part of the heritage of the area. We need to look at designing a cultural interpretation center that really talks to its complex history and shared memories. And so we said, how can we construct that? So we said there is in fact a historical fiction on this place, and so we use that to enter the site. So rather than going to this town and just looking around and say, oh, this doesn't have anything. So we said we wanted to enter through the imagination of a novelist, and especially talk about historical events that were set at certain points in the city, which are even existing today. So there are points that are referenced in the novel are in fact traceable to the city, to the town. So there's also that kind of examination that the students have to do. So where is that river that he talks about? Where is that church that he talks about? So they actually still exist. Some of the names have been changed. And so we said, let's enter the site through that, because this is the only way we can really engage with people and characters and stories. And rather than chronological history, the history of the objective history, we wanted to go through a historical, that's why I said historical fiction, a fiction that is history, rather than history as a kind of an objective account of facts and events, which is not really useful to students, to really understand the place. So we used that, and we said the students read. It was a very interesting collaborative. And again, and as I say, meandering, we were kind of course, the outcome is there. I mean, we wanted outcomes as well. But we asked students, each student was to read a chapter. Then they were meant to retell the stories to each other in a group. So there was a kind of a storytelling, shared memories, so they also have a shared memory of the book. It is not just, it's very different to reading a novel just by yourself, page by page, 35 chapters in a stretch. So it's kind of a collective and collaborative reading and a retelling. So in the sense, they are also reconstructing the story. Then the students converted these chapters into 4 or 5 graphic tiles, which showed emotion, space, and event. And then we made a whole installation, which kind of showed, how the novel might look like in a graphic form. Of course, that is not how the novel looks like in the graphic form. It's an artifice. Of course, it is artificial. So, but we acknowledge that it is not a truthful account of the novel, but it's an artificial account of the novel. And then students then converted that into 3-dimensional spaces, which were then kind of assembled together on site, and kind of functions were negotiated into that. So again, we really wanted to take something where the plan was the last thing you make, and that's when they really start to struggle, because there are certain ways of designing that we wanted to, because as a feminist practitioner and academia, I'm interested in feminist pedagogies as well. And so this has always been a thread for me, probably not wittingly or unwittingly. I'm not sure, it's always conscious. I don't start out by saying, well, I'm now going to have feminist pedagogy in the studio. It doesn't quite work. You can't drive it. It's not something that you drive like art. But you might find that some projects are amenable to you exploring, feminist pedagogies. And here I really wanted to do away with this idea of the plan and the orthographic, and think of other ways in which you might do an organization that is not planar. So again, like I said, she's not something that we can drive, but it's something that the project also has to let you do that. So this was kind of broadly what we worked on. It's a strong collaboration between students, teachers. A lot of brainstorming, a lot of arguments, and no, you don't quite understand what's happening. No, you don't understand what's, it's constantly, yes, no, and the students as well, so it's not quite straightforward. And there was a way, the way the methodology was structured, it was done in a way that the students could weave in and out of it. It wasn't like a straightforward linear process that you have to do step one. If you miss step one, you can't do step two. If you miss step two, you can't do step three. That's a linear process. When you can't, when it's like a video game, like you can't go to that level if you haven't done this level. It's that's very linear. Designers talk about process all the time, but the process is linear. It's a factory production. We can bring it back to Ruskin and say, I don't like the factory. I want to be a humane designer. I want my intellectual capacities to be respected. Don't straitjacket me. Give me space to move, right? So again, like I said, it's a process. It's not something, we didn't say that, we're going to make a non-linear, meandering type of studio methodology. But that's again emerges. It emerges through conversations with your faculty, conversation with students. There's something that you fix, and there's something that keeps changing around it and keeps evolving till the very last day, really, of the studio. Yeah.
What you brought in here very interestingly is the non-linearity of the process and non-linear design. And there's something that you have talked about, the rhizome, which I'm going to bring up next. How do you connect this to design?
Yeah, I think there's a really good article by a scholar called Randall Teal, and he talks about two forms of thinking. One is the tree, and one is the rhizome. And the rhizome has many roots and many points at which it emerges, but whereas a tree is this one point of emergence, right? So I think this idea of non-linearity is that when you can traverse back and start and also enter the design process at different points. Whereas with the tree-like thinking, it only moves in one direction, and there's one starting point. And there's not multiple starting points as well. So I just put this image in, nothing major, but just to kind of look at what that might mean. If you just put a tree next to that, and then just look at what that might mean in terms of structures of thinking.
No, I mean, perhaps for me, because I was looking in from a very objective perspective, when I look at this image and I look at the body of your work, it has been nonlinear in many, many ways. So for me, this was extremely epitomizing in some sense of the kind of trajectories you've taken in your career with many, many different paths. And I thought this was a very potent image to bring to our students that, because when you start looking at design and you say, okay, I'm going to first do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, it's almost like you're always setting out the path that you think you need to have. But the whole, the beauty of being in a education ecosystem at the moment is that it allows you to explore and break off and join at different ends without caring about how the industry is going to react to a question like this, or you don't have a client's budget or a deadline.
You will probably never design like this in real life, but you're as a student, you're learning. Why shouldn't you design like this? Why shouldn't you? Because you're learning. Right? When you're practicing, yes, you're learning too, but at that point in time, you don't have a 16-week semester so you can meander a bit.
So, I mean, we've talked about a little bit of your history. We've talked about your current work. But if I were to kind of ask you, where do you envision architectural practices, or at least architectural investigation, to lead into, or what do you predict is going to be the trajectories for the future, rhizomatic or not? Where do you feel it going in the next 5 to 10 years?
I mean, do I have to sound optimistic or pessimistic? That's the question.
Your call. It's your point of view.
I can't predict, because I don't think we can predict. I mean, at least I can't predict, but I would hope that they go towards futures that are more sustainable, green, addressing climate change. I think these agendas are important. People design that is more inclusive. We talk about inclusive all the time. Just you as a designer, you know this more than anybody else. And do we really, can we really give ourselves a mandate that in the next 5 years, we will try to make only accessible public spaces? Can we do that? So I mean, if I had a hope and a dream for the future, for the next 5 years, I think design should be inclusive, physically, in terms of disabilities and all of that, should be socially just, and in terms of people who are minorities, as well as towards gender, and also designs that are green, that are sustainable, that are and that are really and that are really doing that. So I think three areas really are really important for me. I think we're just always beat around the bush, and we never give ourselves a mandate that the next 5 years we have to do this. That's it. There's a deadline. And I think as higher education institutions, as well as industry, I think we are to me, I don't see ourselves as adversaries or being in a service relationship. I think we are collaborators, industry and profession. And it's not like I have to make students industry ready. Industry has to be world ready, society ready. Is it that? It's not. Right. So I think we are collaborators, and we have to kind of work together to give certain things a deadline. That's that's it. That's enough. You've got 2 years to do this. You've got 5 years to do this. I think these are big challenges for as educator and academics. And I think and I feel like students are the front of that. I don't think educators are at the front of that. I think we are followers, and I think students should lead this process. I think we should follow, we should assist, and we should enable, and I think students should lead this process of where these big agendas. I think they should take the initiative. It should be their ownership, I think.
Absolutely. I think we've done what we could, and maybe even damaged in certain ways, I feel. Especially, as product designers, I feel we've done enough damage, and I think it is for students to take ownership of what needs to be done. There are a couple more slides, but I think we can now perhaps switch to students. So I'm gonna stop presentation here, and I'm gonna ask students if they have any questions, or anybody from our audience members might have questions for Anuradha. We've been on a long journey, I think, looking at your career, Anuradha, and it's been inspiring. And I think what really interests me about the way you've kind of, knowingly or unknowingly kind of meandered in some sense through the work is also that I think the meaningfulness in some sense that you've brought in whatever that you've looked at or researched or worked out or written. And I think that rigor that you bring to your work is beautiful and essential. And I wish that a lot more students would bring that same kind of reflective rigor to the work. I think it's going to be very, very important for us as we go ahead to, do work that's meaningful, do works that's actually going to make a difference and impact. That's going to be interesting. Are there any questions from the audiences, or I can also, there are some question and answers. Okay, there is a question from Subha Nair. She is asking, I have a question regarding the pursuit of perfection in architecture, about the strength of materials used in buildings today. They can deal with geometry being not so perfect. However, should we not strive towards perfection in geometry? We can make buildings any way we want, but isn't minimal tension between blocks and bricks essential, as the earth is always trying to pull things down?
We were talking about, of course, buildings needs to stand up. So I think that's important. So that's a pretty straightforward question. I think Subha's probably asking whether you can have imperfection in construction. Probably not. I would say not. But I think imperfection in finish and sort of surface finish and all of that can be tolerated. In this, there's an emerging discourse on precision, or the way we fetishize precision, especially in architecture. And the reality is never that. There's a lot of, and how much tolerance is really there. So in terms of the constructive and the tectonic aspects, well, we need to strive for perfection. But in other aspects, whether it's to do with finish or the way things are constructed, we probably needn't fuss that much. But that's my belief. Again, it's not so much about whether or not you should do that. The question, at least in terms of my research, was that it's fundamentally it's about is your work creative? Because what Ruskin talks about is creative labor. It's not about imperfection or perfection, right? If you mandate imperfection, it might be frustrating as well, right? And not creative. So we have to think logically around what he's saying is that when is your work creative? Or what is a sign, what is the evidence that your work is creative? Or that because you are happy and why should you have creative work? Because it makes you happy. You opened the poll, and it was a fantastic response, Rishti. Creative fulfillment. That is the core, really, isn't it? If you're not satisfied with your work in terms of whether you were happy doing that work, and I'm not saying happy like we're happy when we go to a resort, kind of creative happy. Then obviously you would have succeeded. I think it's not so much about perfection or imperfection, but it's about whether the work that you're doing is you find it creative, or what is the enemy of creativity, rather than, especially when we talk about things that are kind of straitjacket, things, these processes where students are kind of like, oh, you have to run down this tunnel, So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the broader idea of creativity, not so much perfection.
I have an interesting anecdote, an example. So Rosenthal, which is a British ceramic manufacturer, it runs a huge factory. So early days, Rosenthal, everything used to be handmade. But now, of course, because of scales of production and costs, etc., everything is mechanized. So a lot of the potters who work in Rosenthal essentially are line managers, and they're essentially sitting and moving things, but there is no human creativity in some sense. Once it's been designed and put into production, the potters who are along the line don't really have a contribution, which is very unlike historically how ceramicists used to work. So there was a designer who did a project, I'm forgetting her name now, and this has to do with what being human and this idea of imperfection is so valuable. She introduced a line of vases where the people on the factory floor, all they had to do was take those perfect vases that were coming through the production line and just pinch them somewhere or just turn them a little somewhere. So introduce the human element. And so each vase was different. It was unique. It was, an identity of that nameless person working behind the factory production. And I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful example of the human ingenuity and imperfection. It's not so much, again, like Anuradha said, it's not about imperfection, but it's about the idea that humans will make errors. You are not robots, you're not artificial intelligence. No two pieces will be similar to each other. And I think that dissimilarity is the beauty. And I think that was very, very interesting. And I think it really drives home the point that the humanness, no matter how brutalist your building is, has to come through, because people have to live in it, so I think there's some resonance there. So that was my little story. Let's move on to the next question. Influence of culture and religion on architecture and design. I'm assuming the question is, what is the influence of culture and religion on architecture and design?
Oh, that's a big question.
Yeah.
We could do an entire subject, religion and culture and design. I mean, I mean, I suppose culture. I mean, I'm not sure if religion has such a dominant role to play now. I mean, I'm not sure because I think now many other aspects govern our life apart from religion, I suppose. Um, but I think culture is important. I mean, I think it is important. I mean, if you look at history of architecture, whether it's different regions, if you look at the vernacular architecture of India, I mean, this whether it is east, west, north, south, whatever. So everybody has different cultures. There, especially, I think where you can see the difference is in the design of the domestic space. Is a culture. How do people live? How do they live together as a family? That's culture. How do they eat? Where do they eat? What do they grow? How do they wash clothes? That's part of culture. That is culture as well. It's not just culture is not just my culture. Culture is not just arts and music and literature, right? Culture is also a living culture. It's how we conduct our day-to-day life. So I think definitely I think at least in vernacular architecture, I think one can see the reflection on that. Very straightforward, especially in domestic, especially the design of domestic spaces. So yeah.
And just to add to what Anuradha is saying, culture is also context, which against which you design. I mean, if you're designing for a particular audience or a family, it's their culture. So it's the context in which you design. So those two are not very disparate from each other, actually. Anuradha, there's another question. This is from Bustana Abdul Latif. I hope I got the name right. How do you stop yourself from nitpicking your project or work to the point your self-esteem has reached a whole new level of low? And as a student, we still lack self-control. So when our self-esteem is low, it affects our work and assignments. Oh.
Yeah, okay. So I think one way to look at this is I always tell students, look at your work before you show it to your faculty. So it's not about nitpicking, but it's about being self-aware. This is what I've done. And I think all students should, I think one of the skill sets I would love to teach students is self-assessment rather than assessment, because we're always trying to please somebody, right, as students. Will my teacher be happy? Is this what they want? So I think self-assessment is important to know that this is all I could do. This is what I'm capable of at this point in time, and this is what it's worth, and I'm going to stop it. So I think restraint, I think what the advice I'd have to this student and many other students is knowing where to stop, especially if you're somebody who's you're quite concerned about the perfection of your work to the extent that it really holds you back. You're never ready to present. There are students who have that. I've seen that happen. And it's like, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. And really, to be honest, look at it as a learning process, and this is the stage that I am. This is the amount of time you gave me, this is the amount of resources I have, and this is the product. But at least there should be a level of assessment done by the student before it comes to the table of so-called formal assessment. I always find that it always reaches from their desk to my desk without a kind of a moderation and a review. So there has to be, I don't know, this is something I'm really trying to always tell students that review your own work before you ask me to review it. I think that's important. So yeah.
No, I think that's sage advice. One has to sort of learn to be objective about your own work. There's a sort of a related question by Shubhadha Ravindra. She asks, what has been the challenge as an educator in design field, and how do you handle it?
I wonder if this is a student. Students won't be so empathetic as to ask what would be a challenge as an educator in the design field. A challenge as an educator. Oh my! I think the pandemic. I think that somebody has also got a question in there about the pandemic. Yeah. I think that has been the biggest challenge as an educator, and I even find students are questioning the quality of their own work. I find that that's really interesting, that they are not happy either, that they are questioning that, did I do enough? Did I do well? Like, is it enough? Like, the grades are there, but they're still, despite the grades, I think students are still concerned about that. I think for me as an educator, this online, learning and teaching has been one of the biggest. I think for anyone who is an educator, has been the biggest challenge. How do I handle it? Somebody says Shubhada is a faculty. So thank you, Shubhada, for that Very relatable question and a very current question, I think. How do we handle it? It's a process. Can anybody claim we've conquered it? I don't think so. So yeah, it's a process. And I think we're constantly discussing, especially how do we design learning and teaching environments online for first year students. First year is damn hard. If you're teaching fourth and fifth year students, you already know them. You have a chemistry. You met them. They know design a little bit, right? First year is a huge challenge, especially when you're transitioning from school to university. In any case, that is hard. In any case, first year is hardest. I think the first and fifth year are the hardest. The bookends are the hardest, I think. And first year is incredibly hard. And so I think we're always in conversation about how do we design learning structures of learning for first year. So, whether it's peer-to-peer learning, it's more collaborative, it's more self-learning rather than teaching, because how much can you teach across the screen? And should we be enabling learning over rather than emphasizing teaching? Because we always say learning and teaching. We should, rather than saying teaching and learning, we say learning and teaching. So still figuring that out, but that's probably, to answer the question, that has been the hardest challenge, really.
We have a lot of questions, Anuradha. What do you say? Do you have time? We are nearly
maybe one more
time. Okay. Do you want to pick your question? There are a bunch. So let's see.
So that's a very good question. I wonder if it's by a student. It's a very interesting question. As for the question, precisely like you said, design field is heavily ingrained in social interaction and exposure. Both of which the students currently lack due to the pandemic. I feel the current generation of students will likely experience hardship on their initial stages of the career due to the scenario and lack of exposure. How do you suggest we tackle this? It's such a
This is from a faculty for sure.
Oh, okay. Nihal is a student. Nihal is a student. Maybe, in fact, maybe an ex-student. No, I think this is a really good question. I think about it constantly. All of you. I think that exposure, right? I mean, this is the only exposure we've got now. We're just sitting in front of the screen all day. Instagram. I think. Yeah, I mean, I actually don't know how to answer that. To be honest, how do we make up for the lack of exposure? I think, Srishti, we talked about this, I think, just very briefly, this idea that how do you find inspiration? I find that what is really lacking in this is not just exposure, but inspiration. Where is that going to come from? You're sitting inside your wall and your tiny desk, right? And where is your inspiration going to come from? From your faculty? I don't think so. And I don't think you should look for that from your faculty only. I think so. I've always talked about this idea of the inner world, listening, whether it is cultivating a hobby, and I don't mean trivial, take up art practice, take up music practice, be an avid reader, convert novels into graphic novels. I think a creative output at this point is going to be very, very important. Listening to music, sketching out musicscapes, when you're listening to instrumental music, sketching those out, doing things where there is less interaction and more reflection and more kind of, cogitation. So I think doing those sorts of things is what's going to really keep your brain alive, I think. And I think at this point, because we are so exposed and we are over interacting, I think, because of this pandemic. We are interacting a lot more. I think you've seen there's been an explosion of webinars in the country and globally as well. I think I would say in this phase, rather than increasing interaction, reduce interaction and go inwards and do things like read, take up creative practice of any kind. Nothing to do, non-academic creative practice of any kind. I think that will really help you in the long run. I think that's the only way out. That's my 2 cents worth.
I think there's been a lot to deal with in the pandemic, and for better or for worse, I think it has given people a lot of time on their hands. You don't have to travel, you don't have to spend time, all of that. So use it for finding your creative inspiration, as Anuradha says. We're almost nearing the end, but I want to, before we close, and I have one last question for you, Anu, but I want to also ask one question to the audience. Swapna, can we have poll 3? We've heard, guys, we've heard Anuradha talk about a lot of different things today, and it does boil down to what we started with, right? Creative fulfillment. So we're also talking about design education. I think that's where my next question is. Swapna, poll 3, please. Not poll 2, poll 3. I would like you guys to answer this. Okay, what is the objective of design education today, given that there is pandemic, given that we are facing a world that is going to be extremely unpredictable? We still don't know how long the pandemic is going to go when we go back to others. I think everybody has had time to really reflect on what is meaningful to them.
Yeah.
And I think this is where I'd like all of you to answer this question. And while you guys do that, Anuradha, my last question to you is this. If you were a student today, what would you do differently?
In what sense?
Think back to going, I'm just trying to sort of connect the loop a little bit. So your undergrad and postgrad practices, education, learning, and given the world is completely changed today, also, when you grow wiser, you kind of reflect back and think, oh, I should have done this, I shouldn't have done that. So looking at the context in which we're alive today, looking back at your journey, perhaps also learning from whether mistakes have been useful and not so useful successes. So what would you do differently?
Is that me answering as myself or as a student?
Yourself, if you were a student today.
I would change nothing.
I should have expected that answer, actually.
I wouldn't change a thing. So what would I change now, or?
Now. If you were a student,
I would still do. I would still pick a design degree.
That's good. That should give confidence to all the students.
But I would learn, but I think what I would try to get skills in is I think finance and learning how to start your business. I think I would really try to do that well. That's probably one thing I didn't do when I was a student, is learning the math, learning the finances things. I think that's really important.
But you've kind of picked on what has been the bane of a lot of creative lives, being able to manage money. We always say left side, right side. I think it's very, very important to know how to make money. And, serendipitously, this is when we asked the first question, when we asked, you want to earn a living? 0%.
Nobody picked paycheck. Because there isn't any paycheck now, is there? There's everybody struggling.
So Swapna, can we have the answers? Let's see how you guys have responded. Have a creative life gets 58% of the votes. Wow.
Very interesting audience. I think I really like I think this response where 21% have said inspiring others. I hope there are some future educators there, Srishti, because we need good designers who are also great educators as well. So.
Absolutely. And I hope all the students feel inspired today, having Anuradha with us. Has it been a fabulous, fabulous conversation? So please put your comments in the chat box still. But Anuradha, thank you so very, very much for all the time and the thoughts and sharing. I think I really did take you way back and got you to really look.
That was great to kind of like revisit and rethink and make me reflect. You make me reflect. So thank you so much. And this is and it's been a great, and the questions have been fantastic, and the outcome of the poll, I feel like I'm doing the right thing. I should continue being a design educator. I should keep going.
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, if you check the chat box, Mariam says, you are amazing. You really inspire them. So I think yeah, you've been.
Thank you. And it's been an honor to actually speak to some of you. And it's late in the evening, and still you guys are here. So that's really amazing. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. So, guys, thank you for staying with us. This has been an amazing, amazing session. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your questions. And Anuradha, as always, brilliant. And I hope to see you very, very soon in Delhi. We have a Japanese food date waiting for us, I think. So hopefully that will come very, very soon. And I think the students here, Sindabe, you are in for a treat this week because you also have Professor Mukesh Patel tomorrow, and on Saturday, Professor Nidip Mehta, both great, phenomenal, inspiring people. And what a great start. I'm so glad I started with a woman this entire session.
Super. Amazing, Srishti. Amazing.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much, and stay well, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. See you.
Okay.
See you tomorrow, actually.
Okay. See ya. See you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.